lots of pizza back here. If you guys want it, grab it. Plus, I need
Give you a quick intro on me. I am the VP of Security Services for Ventech Solutions. Most folks that I've met outside already are saying, well, who's Ventech? I used to work for General Dynamics for about a decade, and we were working for CMS, and when CMS recompetes all their contracts, they like to give them to small businesses. And at the time, there was a company called Buccaneer. They were the small, they won it, they were acquired, GD owned it, GD couldn't recompete, Ventech won it, and we all migrated over. So our company's about 500 people, and we're mostly GDIT folks. So I serve in two roles. One is the VP for all of the corporate side, and then as a director for the HIDS security service. And HIDS is the contract that I was talking about earlier in the slide deck. Excuse me. I also am an adjunct professor for two universities, so UMUC and CTU. CTU is where I earned my doctorate in cybersecurity as well, my master's in network security. Down at the bottom, I put my certificates and certifications. Newest one I have on there, if you don't recognize, INTP was the Insider Threats Program out of Carnegie Mellon. If you guys haven't had a chance to go through something like that, that's really interesting. It ties into a lot of what Eric was saying in behaviors. And then my main background came actually out of networking, so I was a CCNA and CCNP back when I was technical, and then it became too much to maintain once the real world took over. So I let it expire, but at least I have some knowledge of subnetting and security. I've really spent most of my career in four places. I was on active duty as a United States Marine, and then I went back and served for 10 years in Southeast Asia. I was forward deployed with the SecOps units, setting up computer systems and tents and networks for them and satellite systems. I spent some time with Booz Allen setting up the healthcare system for the medical facilities. So when you actually go on base to one of their medical treatment facilities, they have their own set of servers and protocols and applications different than like what the VA would have. And then as I was just referencing General Dynamics for a few years in healthcare before the contract moved over to Ventech. So gone through a little bit of everything, seen a little bit of everything, worked DOD for almost a decade and now about 5-6 years in healthcare. No experience in manufacturing, industrial, that kind of stuff. So it's nice to get out here and meet some of you folks, and you guys are doing something different. We all share the same concerns, but it's a kind of a fresh way of looking at things. So when we talk about setting up some form of security controls assessment, some type of in-house testing, I'm going to try to give you questions that we ask, scenarios, analogies, anything that I can do to make it to where it fits for everybody and everybody understands it and everybody can relate to it in some way, shape, or form. I couldn't possibly go into everything that we had to do to get this program up in a 1 hour or less presentation. So if you want to talk more about it, we'll actually have to do that offline. But when you go to do something like this, you really need to ask yourself some of these core questions. You know, what is my need? What gap am I trying to fill? Why even do it at all? What are my drivers and who are my stakeholders? We use stakeholders and drivers terminology a lot in everything we do, whether it's project management, security. But the key here is anything that you stand up, any amount of time you spend, any money that you spend, someone's going to expect to see something at the end of it. And if they don't see a good return on their investment, you're the one that's going to be paying for it. To be able to do that, some of the questions like how do we define and measure our successes? I'm going to show you in my slides how we've done it. You obviously can tailor it to whatever you want, but there's got to be a way to show that you've achieved success or that you're not going to achieve it, and you've got to be able to bail and just dump it and say, sorry, I wasted your money, but let's stop. And then probably the most important thing, can you produce a repeatable model? It doesn't help if you did it one time and it's a one-off. It's something we've got to be able to do over and over and for all of us to be able to use. And I think that this is one of the most important questions is should you do it and how? Everybody, or I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people see a new technology, a new way of doing something, and it sounds great, they want to jump on it, but at the end of the day, should you really do it? Do you want to be the first one? Do you want to wait and let everybody else do it and you'll take the lessons learned? What's the benefit? So as you go through this, be asking yourself, should I do this? It's a big investment. So to start, we're going to kind of define some models and some of the terms. There's only a couple of them, so luckily you don't need a glossary for this. But we use the term security control assessment, or an SCA, to provide an auditor's view of your system or environment as it compares to a particular framework. So our goal here is to get an authority to operate or retain our authority to operate. We have to pick some type of framework. In our case, the government's already defined that for us, but in your world, it could be any number of things. The framework, let's use the term framework loosely here. I just want to throw a couple examples of what folks use. In healthcare, high trust, HIPAA, and RMF are used frequently. A lot of NIST documentation that gets converted into whatever agency's term they want. In our case, we use what's called an acceptable risk safeguards, or the ARS, and all that is NIST documentation that's been adapted to make sure it meets HIPAA and other requirements. Whether you talk about DoD, healthcare, other areas, you may hear people call it a security risk audit. Some people call it CNA, some call it ANA. Some of those terms are actually expired now and no one uses them. But the end point here is all you're looking at is I want someone to come in and look at my system and tell me whether or not I'm compliant. And as Eric said, it doesn't mean am I secure. It means did I meet the requirements so I can check a box and someone will give me my piece of paper and say you're clear to operate. So keep it a little bit lively here. There's going to be some pictures in a second, but I wanted to put it in a way that you guys maybe can understand it if we're not all speaking the same language and we're in different sectors of industry. I like to draw an analogy to a restaurant. I don't know how many folks have worked in a restaurant before, but I'm sure most people have seen TV shows, worked in a restaurant, and you know that they have health assessments and I forgot the term, but the health inspector, thank you, comes in and looks at their environment and gives them a rating, and then they're allowed to either stay open or they have to close. So what does this have in common with an SCA? So I say that this is what most organizations look like 360 days out of the year. It's a dirty kitchen that honestly, if you went to their restaurant, you would never be caught dead eating there if you saw what it looked like. However, just like with an SCA, in a restaurant, if a health inspector is going to come in, they forewarn you. I'm going to be there next Wednesday. What does everyone do? They clean. So what you end up with is a place that looks like this. The problem is it only looks like this 5 days out of the year or thereabouts because it gets clean, they use it, and then it gets dirty and we're back to this. But the whole point here is the health inspector only cared on the day that the health inspector was on site. And that's no different than the compliance audits that are done anywhere today. Someone does it, which one are you? Here's your rating. Our goal, and what you'll see in the slide deck, was to create something that says how close can we keep it to the clean kitchen all year long and be able to prove it with evidence, versus paying someone to come in one time and give us something that we know is useless. So what the government, at least CMS and part of HHS, and what they've moved to is what they call an adaptive capabilities testing. And their version and their definition is basically stating this is a holistic view, comparing you again to a framework as you go towards your ATO. So the wording's almost the same, but you'll see some differences in the way they look at things and how they evaluate things, and it's supposed to provide you this risk-based assessment that everyone's looking for. So if we wanted a goal or a snapshot, using restaurants again, this is what it would look like, ideally. Again, on the right, you have that perfectly clean kitchen. On the left, you have a mostly clean kitchen with people making it a little bit of a mess as they're doing work. The difference here, though, is on this model, you know what they're doing, you know who's making it dirty, why they're dirtying it up, and what they're going to do to fix it. The important piece here, and you'll see it as we go through the other slides, is being able to tie what each person's doing in there and what effect that has on the overall security. Same way here, are they doing something that's going to cause a health problem, and how does that tie into what their peers are doing? So if you wanted to compare these and say, well, what's in an SCA, what's in your new ACT, from an SCA perspective, they are going to look at security documents. They're going to look at vulnerability and compliance scan results, so say a Tenable or retina scan. They may look at a tripwire product or some other product that's giving you a compliance check against your baselines, assuming you have baselines. As Eric said, most don't. They may use some penetration tests, but it's their choice. On the ACT side, a little bit different. It uses everything that's on the SCA side, but they go beyond that and they say, okay, is there anybody conducting a bug bounty? Is there anyone doing external pen testing? In our organization, we have about 6 external bug bounty and pen tests done per year on top of everything that we do. Most of the time, we're not aware of it until we catch them trying to penetrate our firewall. And then it's, okay, are we having a pen test? Oh, yeah, good. If we don't catch it, then there's a problem. We now have to meet a couple other things. Homeland Security's Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program. I'll give you a slide on that in case you've never dealt with this. But essentially, this is their way of wrapping up everything of who's on my network, what's on my network, what are they doing, how are you monitoring it, how can you prove to us that you're monitoring this all the time. A lot of people confuse CDM with continuous monitoring when they are completely different, but they share a lot of the same attributes. And then, of course, hopefully defense in depth is a common term here. And you'll see how this all gets used. But this is a goal. This is the way the government lays it out. I can be upfront and honest with you. It doesn't always play out this way, but it gives you a framework of what you want to achieve. And as I said, if you want to measure your success, you know what you should be doing. You can go back and look and see if you actually achieved it. So where do I get source information, and what does it mean? From an SCA perspective, we are very much compliance driven. All we want to do is, like Eric said, check to see if you check the box. Did you meet the request, move on? We're heavily dependent upon technical findings. So if I run a tenable scan and it comes back and says you have 3 criticals and 5 highs, that tells me how good a job I'm doing. Or in theory it does. And we're very control oriented. So in our environment, we have about 407 controls for a FSMA moderate system. A FSMA high system has about 487. We've got an additional 150 controls we put in place to meet our SANS top 20 CIS controls, and then another couple dozen to be OWASP top 10 compliant. So at any point in time, you could be looking at 450 to 600 controls that are in place simply to say, am I secure? And at the end of the day, all you're going to do is get a report that says whether or not you check the box. It doesn't actually tell you if you're secure. On the ACT side, and this is where they're moving, the federal government as a whole is moving to this. DOD is already adopting new standards. You talked about vendor issues. I forgot the acronym. It's CMM. It's either CMMI or something close, CMMC, something like that. It's rolling out January. It comes out, and it's going to have a whole sort of rules and frameworks and certifications around how you deal with your vendors, how you purchase things. So you're seeing the entire federal government move that way. They want to move to a risk-driven analysis. And what this means is I no longer want to just hear that I failed 5 controls. I want to know what those 5 controls mean to me and what happens when you combine those controls to see if it's a bigger problem. So what they did, and I'll give you examples of all this, is they've created 16 security capabilities, and that's their way of saying rather than looking at 500 things, let's look at 16 categories and see how well you do with those categories. That'll tell us overall, is your behavior good or bad? It's capability oriented, again, not compliance. There are core controls, so there are things, sir.
Just a quick question. On vendor provide you something?
Yes. If they want to do business with the federal government, yes. Outside of the federal government, they may not. It depends on the sector and what the sector and industry requirements are. Within the federal government, and I try not to memorize all the acronyms. I can just give you the acronym. But if you look up EAS and EAL levels, when a vendor creates a product, if they want to work with the federal government, there's a level, and it says essentially how secure is it or how trusted is it, how far have you tested it. They'll provide those to you. If you go to someone like and you say, okay, I want to see your security measures, they will never show that to you. However, they'll give you a SOC 2 Type 2 report that says, look, I can prove that I was validated and audited by somebody. I passed. Here you go. And that's the best you're going to get out of them unless you've got an SLA and you pay enough money that they care that they don't want to lose you. And I can tell you that you're nobody to them. They're so big that, you know, one customer means nothing. And I believe it's the same way with someone like, they're not going to turn anything over. You don't want to come to them. They don't care. They'll just go to the next. So the best you're going to get is something that says we at least performed an audit and we passed. And that's it. Core controls are prioritized. So there are certain controls when you talk about MFA, when you talk about access management, those are controls that the government wants to see us checking all the time. They don't care which category it falls in. There's got to be that extra check that says it's happening every year, and I'll show you how they do that. And then they broke the category of risk down into 3 groups. What's my direct risk, my indirect risk, and a risk from another system. So in our environment, to give you kind of a little bit of paint a picture, we have an on-premises data center, and we have an AWS instance, and we have a migration occurring right now. So we have things in both sides, and everybody's moving to the cloud. So as a result, if you're one of the organizations who develops code for us, you have a lot of controls that are inherited from us. Because in our data center, we control the environment, we control the platforms, you control the software that's loaded on them. Same way in AWS, they control the facility and the physical rack, but you control the software that gets loaded on it. So we have to break these up in a way to say who's responsible for what and which one's a shared model, very similar to what Eric said. So what does this look like? So from an SCA perspective, all they're looking for is what are my failed findings. You ran a scan or you did a test. What did I fail on? What do I need to clean up? And in most cases, all you do is you're given a period of time, depending on the severity, evidence, and they may come and retest, and then they're going to come back and certify that, okay, you're good to go, accept whatever risk remains, and move on. Sir?
One question regarding all that. Is there any discussion with the CFO or people there about policies and procedures to keep current on these kind of things?
No. No, CFOs don't come into play. Again, now with the federal government, it's a little bit different. In a commercial organization, if I went into a hospital or a manufacturing facility, that might be different. I mean, CFO is the one that's going to have to pay for it. But in most cases, especially in my line of work, you're going to have a set of ISOs that are maintaining these systems and responsible for them. You're going to have a line of business owner who is the one that's making sure the projects to get all these applications developed and placed into the environment are going to be involved. But most of the time, your developer is going to come back and say, I have a congressional mandate that this must be in by this date. And as Eric said, I know it's got 15 viruses or vulnerabilities in it. I don't care. I have to get it out Friday. Otherwise, I miss my deadline. Now, at that point, the line of business owner has to accept the risk or say, no, it can't go. And in my experience, they always accept the risk because they're not going to be the one that says this product didn't meet its deadline. The ISO is going to be sitting there identifying all the risk and saying, I would not deploy it for these reasons, but at the end of the day, you own it, your call. And someone's got to put that signature on a piece of paper. At sometimes it will get to the CISO level, but that's usually more of our overall infrastructure and our overall ratings for the entire place. So the key here is, and this is again goes back to that goal slide, ACT wants to look at everything. They want to take in all of the sources, not just the failed SCA findings. I'll show you how we do it, and I'll show you some areas that it falls a little bit short. So this is an example of what failed controls look like compared to a category. So using credential 02 as an example category, I've just highlighted 4 random blocks and controls. And each one of these maps to a different set of controls within that 500 controls that I was talking about. So in a normal SCA, let's say an auditor came in and they found these 4 things wrong. They're going to report back what those 4 things are, and it's now your job to figure out how to fix them. But from an ISO or from a line of business perspective, they're looking at it and they're saying, well, I don't do continuous monitoring. Is that really that big a deal? No, I'm okay. Let's just accept the risk. What ACT attempts to do is say, did you realize that you failed 4 things, but those 4 things all were mapped back to a particular category? That means that you are severely limited in your ability to satisfy this category. The other 15, you might be doing a phenomenal job. And what they want to do is draw attention to it to say, you're lacking in this area. And if they do this across all of their systems, they can go and say, do we have an actual systemic problem across all data centers, all contractors, where maybe we don't own the right software, we don't have the right skilled personnel, we're not paying enough to do it. What's the reason we keep failing? Typically, up until this point, what they do is they sit there on phone calls and say, how many failed things did you have? How many did you have? When will you have them fixed? They don't really put a lot of detail into why am I failing and why do I continuously fail? So this is their way of kind of putting a heat map on a specific category. So there's some key components here if you actually want to build an in-house program. And kind of give you a scenario or a challenge here. So I use my environment as an example. How do you set up a program that manages more than 10 FSMA systems? They're all being tested at different stages in that 3-year ATO process. They're all required some form of penetration or third-party testing. How's that manageable? And the solution for us was we moved all of our control families into a 3-year model where every system gets the same controls at the same time, and we pushed all of our penetration and third-party testing into year 3. And I'll show you why we did that and what it looks like. This is an example, and it's a small one because it's not even all of our systems, but I named the systems 1 through 10 across the top and the control families A through J. In our environment, we actually have 23 control families that make up that 500 controls, and we have 12 or 13 systems. So if you built out a matrix like this, literally every time you go to do an SCA, you have to look at what system is it, what year is it, what controls am I responsible for, and then look over to where they're color-coded to say, can I do this or do I have to go pay an auditor? And as you're paying these auditors to come in and out and do these tests, it gets extremely expensive. Whether they come in for 100 hours or 150 hours, your bill's almost the same because you've paid to get them in and set up and do whatever it is they're going to do. You want to get the most bang for your buck out of them. So we rearranged everything to where all the systems are going to get the same control family testing every year. And as I said, we moved all of the shared controls and the third-party controls down to the bottom. Now, why do we do this? 1, it delays and pushes out any of our costs to year 3. So our first 2 years we come in cheaper. It helps with budgets. Year 3, yes, we are going to pay extra, but now our auditor is going to be on site at the same time to do everything once and they're out of our hair. And we don't see them again for 3 years. Also, we do it at the 3rd year. So they're going to, when they come and certify it, we're getting our new ATO and we keep moving. We have an additional which is we want to take over those services and we don't want to pay an auditor anymore, and that gives us 3 years to try to learn how to do that or get the right people in place that we can go to the government and say, I can do it, why are you paying them? That's the real reason we do it. So that does a few things for you. Everyone from the ISO to the analyst, developer, they all know what they're going to be tested on, when they're going to be tested. It's very simple for them to say, what's coming up, how do I achieve it? We can set up continuous monitoring, and I'll show you how we do that. And then we can, again, as I said, push all of our shared responsibilities and our auditor, third-party auditor stuff to year 3. And when I was referring to what it costs for an auditor, we call them 1/3 SCAs or full SCA. So every year you're doing a 1/3, and on the last year, the third year, you do a full. The cost difference is about 90%. So if I do a 1/3, I pay 90% of what I'd pay for a full. So it doesn't make sense to keep bringing people in and paying 90% of the full cost to only get them to do 1/3 of the work. And you'll see how that adds up pretty quick. So the topic that's always the most difficult to get past, and that's funding. How do I fund this? Because there is going to be a cost involved. We looked at it, had 3 different ways. First is just request more money. That doesn't normally go over so well, so we skipped that one. We went with repurpose current funding. So we wanted to move members from one team that we have to another. So I have a compliance analyst team, and I have about 9, 10, maybe up to 13 people now. We just split them and moved half of them to become assessors and half of them to stay analysts. We brought in a couple auditors, and now we've got 3 little sub-teams within our entire larger security team. We replace senior personnel with intermediate level members. If you have people that aren't working out, and we'll talk more about personnel because it's going to be the biggest sticking point, there's no reason if a person leaves by choice or you ask them to leave, that if they were a senior, you automatically go out and replace them at the senior level. A lot of times, you're paying extra money, but you're not necessarily getting the extra work output. The other thing is, and I've seen it a lot with third-party auditors, they'll say, I'm bringing you my most senior auditor. He's got 15 years experience. Great, but he only needed 5 to do what we were doing. Why am I paying for 15? So there's a lot of places that you can actually, bring in newer staff, more junior staff, train them, get more value out of them, give more people an opportunity to do some work in this field instead of just paying for expensive auditors. And then the third one there is really important, hire personnel in a lower labor rate area. When my team started off, we were all Virginia and Maryland based. Now most of my team is actually Iowa based and Tennessee based. Probably about 75–80% is Midwest. Labor rates are cheaper, and you get just as good a talent. They're just as skilled, just as educated. They're hungry. They want to work. They don't have as many opportunities a lot of times in their areas, so they do a better job. When you're in Baltimore, D.C., you can walk out of any job in that afternoon and go somewhere else and have another job. So building loyalty, building that work ethic is extremely difficult and expensive. And in our case, like I said, we kind of used the hybrid approach, so we moved a little bit of our staff to another team. We changed out labor rates. We hired different locations, and we achieved the cost savings. So here's where the in-house piece starts to become important and difficult. If you can imagine that when you go through an audit, you have all sorts of paperwork that has to be done. We just call this the user submissions for the sake of this slide. You have to have a way to organize this. So as you organize it, we started using SharePoint, and you can use anything that you want, but this just happened to be what we used. And this was a way for us to create a folder structure and versioning control and all of that. But then we had to figure out how do we take this stuff and make sense of it. And where I mentioned that we used our in-house tool, Valhalla, the reason we used it here, and again, you can do this manually if you'd like, is that we wanted to be able to look at these different types of documentation for all of these different FSMA systems, and we wanted to see what was being done and when it was being done and who was reviewing it, who was authoring it. So the tool that we use allows us to look into SharePoint and say, for every time a release was going to be done by a developer, there should have been a security impact assessment done first. Did they do it? Did they get it in before their release? Was it approved? Did an ISO look at it? Did they reject it or allow it with exceptions? All that is automatically captured by the tool and put into a table in a historical database. So now as we do continuous monitoring and as we do our SCA, we can clearly look at every one of those organizations and say, do you follow policy? The government can now look at those same organizations and say, every time you submit one of these documents or every time one of your systems gets deployed, you failed to do it. Why do we want to keep doing business with you? We'd rather go with company B who's always following policy. And this gives the government a great way to audit their own contractors to see how they're behaving. The one item that we came up with when we wanted to do an in-house assessment program was conflict of interest. Everybody started jumping up and down saying, you can't do this, you can't assess yourself, and that's accurate. What we can do, though, is assess everybody else that we don't have a vested interest in. So I highlighted some areas of what CMS uses, but the whole point here is you can't be the person assessing your own work. So in my case, like I said, we have 13 systems. We're responsible for one. I still pay a third-party auditor to come in. But the 12 that I'm not responsible for, I do the audits for them. And in return, that removes any conflict of interest. All I'm doing is oversight. It's the government's job whether they want to accept risk, they want to punish somebody, they want to enforce a policy. I have no say or control over that. There is no enforcement arm in my contract. So the most important part of getting this program up is really staffing. And it's a topic a lot of people don't like to talk about because it requires you to manage people correctly. It requires you to get rid of people who don't share your culture and your values. It requires a lot of diligence from management's side. If you can get to the point where you're willing to do whatever it takes to get the right team with the right culture and the right work ethic, you need to determine how many staff members you need. You've got to be able to size out and scope what the team looks like. You know, how many levels and tiers do you need? Does your organization have some type of staffing plan that says, I will allow junior, intermediate, senior, lead, manager, whatever the case may be? You know, how many tiers do you want to have? How many members should you have at each tier? You know, why are we going out and hiring all seniors? Why can't we teach juniors and bring them up within our organization? Do you need specific knowledge or general audit knowledge? If you can find someone who's got general audit knowledge and understands processes, understands documentation, they can come in and learn your environment. You don't have to pay for that specialized experience. In most cases, even if you pay for the specialized experience, it's never going to map one-to-one with what you're doing, and you're going to have to retrain them to some extent anyway. So why pay for it? You're not getting any value out of it. You can look at years of experience. I know people love to put their resumes up and say, I have 20 years of experience. Okay, what have you learned in 20 years that someone couldn't learn in 3 years? And just because you've done it for 20 years doesn't make you any better at it. I live by the principle that I want to see how the people behave and how they work and how they act. Look at all the soft skills before the hard skills because we can train them on a job. Anybody who's typically disagreed with me as I've changed out my team, I like to, as I said, use analogies. I go back to basketball and Shaquille O'Neal. The guy shot probably more free throws than anybody on the planet in the history of the planet. Still can't make a free throw. And you can hire someone that's got 20 years of experience that's done this day in and day out. That doesn't automatically mean they're going to do it better. There's a lot of value in experience, but you need to be able to change and find out what they have, how they do it, and use the interview process to identify it. Certifications is a big one. A lot of people like to have a lot of certifications. I enjoy having some of them. But what do they provide? How does it make you credible? What functionality does it provide to your environment? Again, it's about what you need, not necessarily what they have. You fit the person to the job and not the other way around. Are there customer mandates? In my case, we have a mandate by the government that everybody on the team must have a security certification, and there's an ANSI website that we have to go out, and they have to have something on that list or they can't work for our team. I don't set it, but that's just the rule I have to follow. So someone can come up to me and say, look at these 9 wonderful certs I have, and I say, well, none of them are on the list. There's nothing I can do unless you'll go get a new cert. And then will you allow certifications to substitute for experience? In some cases, that might be applicable. In some cases, it's not. We've got folks that are new to the forensic side. They're going out and getting CEHs. They've got the experience, but we'll waive a couple years if they get that. We know they've proven themselves. And then really outside of certifications, what are you looking for outside of the certifications and the job knowledge? Very difficult time interviewing because we asked all the typical interviewing questions. We Googled what are the common interviewing questions. And when we went through it, we found a lot of people were getting better at lying on their resume and tailoring their resume to what we wanted to see. And then when we would hire them, for some reason, they couldn't perform. So for each of my teams, we have a different interview, different set of questions, and we have different questions for every level that we interview. We're not going to ask a junior the same thing as we ask a senior. And a couple times I've interviewed people where, say, for example, a product called Wireshark, they'll put on their resume SharkWire. Okay, well, did you accidentally type it backwards even though you use this product every day, or did you see something in a job requirement somewhere and you tried to copy it and just screw it up? So one of the first questions we'll ask them is, tell me what color the screen is. And they'll just look at you and go, what do you mean? Well, I don't care what version you use. What color is it? Tell me, if you use Wireshark, it has colors based on packets that go through. If they can't tell you that, then they're lying to you. And usually the interview ends in about 2 minutes. If we can't trust them to give us that type of information and be honest with us and say, here's what I can do and what I can't, we're not going to hire them. It took us about a year to change all of our interviewing processes, and it was trial and error. We went through about 4 iterations of it, but we've got it down to the point now where we ask for writing samples if you're on the compliance team. We give you scenario-based things. We'll let you do it the day before you come in for your interview. Here's your scenario. Write it tonight, bring it with you tomorrow. Some people won't even show up to the interview the next day. But it was a quick way to rule them out, and we didn't have to waste our time interviewing them and all the time that goes along with it. We were on to the next candidate that could actually do it. And
They can ask Siri, no problem.
well, and that, I mean, so that's kind of, I take a pessimistic approach to this because, you know, if you interview 10 people, one might be good, one might be a gem. But if a person won't take the time to Google the answer, why would we hire you? You know, and on an analyst side, let's be honest, your job is to peer review, your job is to author, your job is to make sure that the stuff that's in our security documents is accurate. If you can't Google an answer to a question that we gave you a day in advance, it's not going to be a good fit. A couple more slides here for you. So I give another example, and this analogy is kind of really important when it comes to your employees. It's a sore spot for most people. When you think about mowing a lawn, I live on an acre of land. The house on each side of me is just an empty lot. They pay someone to come mow their grass, so it looks like I sit on 3 acres. If someone came out and mowed your yard and only mowed half of it, but asked for the full, say $50 it cost to mow that yard, would you pay them?
No.
You sure?
Yeah.
So ideally, you would say that if you wanted your house mowed, the yard should look like this when it's done and they come ask for their $50. If it looked like this, you wouldn't pay them. The irony is, in the compliance world and security world, you probably are paying most of those people right now. How many people really have employees that work their full 40 hours or 45, 50 hours a week? How many of them do it, the work that they do in a timely manner? One of the things that we went through before we set up this program was we listed out everything that a compliance analyst does all day. And we took the entire team and we sat them in a room and said, how long should it take to do this task? And I know there's outliers and special circumstances, but on average. So let's say that the group came up with an average of two hours to do a task. Great. Now, the next time we go through an SCA, we look at their workload for the week and we say, you should be able to do all this because it's within the time frame you gave us. If they come back and say, I didn't get it done, well, there better be a good reason. Did you not receive what you needed? Did you escalate? Because you've already committed that you can do the work. So as I pay a senior, for example, I expect a senior to be able to do something, and I expect all my seniors to be able to do it. If they can't be a senior. Once we did that, productivity went up quickly. We did lose some people, but productivity went up because everybody understood, okay, here's a reasonable amount of time and here's what they expect out of me, and if I don't give it, they're going to be upset or they may look for a replacement. But it took away that freedom of everybody just doing whatever they want and turning in whatever they want and hope that the organization was happy with it. And I'm going to show you how that's going to equate to a massive dollar savings here. And that's where we get benefits and value adds. This is the slide. I put the source up there because it's not mine. This is off the DHS website. This is all about CDM, the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation. This talks all about their different phases, and they keep revamping this and changing it. It used to be an onion and defense in depth picture, now it's this. But they want to know who's on the network, what's happening, and they've got different ways that the government has implemented it. Booz Allen Hamilton has a big $1 billion contract to go into all the government HHS data centers and install suites of equipment that accomplishes all of this. Unfortunately, they ran out of money and didn't install it. They're getting more now. So continuous monitoring, this is a big one. This is a huge value add. And if you want to set up your own in-house program, this is one of the ways that you get it approved and you show your customer or customers your value. If I take my FSMA system and I'm going to call this a random FSMA system, and I'm going to break it down into quarterly release schedules, I'm going to have a set of folders that's identical in every one of those releases. So I just picked 3 documents here, and it's going to be in all of them. Now, from the government's perspective, I'm going to have a tool, and again, in my case it's Valhalla, but you could use Excel or something else, which is where we started. And I go out and I look at the ARS and I say, what family is this and what control is it? And when does the ARS say I have to test? And this may be once a year, once every 3 years, whatever the case may be. But to meet continuous monitoring frequency requirements, the ARS defines its own value. And it doesn't define it for everything, so we only put up the ones that it does. I then go back to my customer and say, okay, the ARS says this first one should be done twice a year. What do you think? And they say, well, because it's a low level of effort and cost, I want to see it done 4 times a year. If that's what they want, we build that into our framework, and we say we expect to see that control met 4 times a year. Now, the developer knows what the rules are, and the developer has their processes for meeting it. We don't bother the developer. We have a team of assessors that are sitting back watching Valhalla to say, did they do it? If something comes across and it's missing, the assessor will actually go in there and create an empty record that says missing SIA for Q1. And that tells the ISO, I never got what I should have been looking for. Now, ideally, the ISO should be seeing and knowing this, but they're busy, they're government. So we do it for them. And then if we can't do things as frequently as they want, we put down why we can't do it. If they want to pay extra, they want to accept the risk, that's up to them. And the bottom one, this is kind of a sample table. This is what it looks like when it pops up. But the government can then go in there and see all the way up to the CISO level what was submitted from each organization in every folder. When was it submitted? Was it late or not? And then probably the most important piece here is from the ISO's perspective. Let's say there's a congressional mandate that says this software has to be deployed tomorrow, but it's riddled with vulnerabilities. I don't want to accept it, but what choice do I really have? I don't want to stand in front of Congress. They can accept it or approve it with exceptions, and they can write in there all their exceptions. And now they can say, before this next release goes out, you must fix this or I will block the next one regardless of your congressional mandate. Now it's all documented. Any auditor wants to come in and look. If there's a breach, whatever, they can say, why did it happen? Who approved this? And from my perspective as a contractor, I'm now covered. So if you set something up in your organization, I highly recommend that you have some way of tracking this and providing it as evidence when an auditor does come in. And this I wanted to give you in case you guys have not seen controls. This is what 2 simple controls look like on the government sheet. And remember, there's almost 500 of them. So as you go through this, you have to make heads and tails of what they're asking you to do. So we talk about something simple like security awareness training that's done annually. I'm going to highlight the parts that we pick out of it, but what you can see is it's asking you to do it at 3 different times. When you have a new user, when a change occurs, and once a year. Changes occur so frequently, they throw that one out. So if I'm new and annually, I get it done. But then the question is always, well, what is security awareness training? How much do I need? What counts? Well, they define up there what the appropriate level is. Just like HIPAA, they're not prescriptive in any way. They're just telling you what their expectation is. You then get down there and say, we'll give you some examples. We want you to display posters. We want you to have policy and privacy reminders, generate emails. So we might send out phishing emails on a monthly basis. We might conduct phishing campaigns. We print posters. We send out newsletters. In theory, we're meeting the requirement. We're checking the box. And then it says it has to be elements that are addressable under HIPAA. So now we're going to go out and tie our security awareness training in with DISA standards. So we'll go out to DISA and take a cyber awareness challenge annually. We'll do HHS records management. We do a PHI, PII deck.
So this is off the technical controls. How do you address the non-technical controls? For instance, software development or management budgets, having a dedicated IA budget.
We don't have to deal with that. As part of the contract with the government, every time you sign up as a contractor, there is a overarching security policy that they have to meet. So we don't actually get into whether or not they hired the people. That's been a big argument of mine is if I bid out a contract and I want to win it and it's only a 10-person contract and I know I need 3 security people, I can't afford to hire 10 developers plus 3 because I'll never win. So out of those 10, 3 are just going to get collateral duties and become security folks. So what happens is the contract gets awarded and then they come to me and they go, I'm security point of contact, what do I need to do? And it's like, that's not how this works. And then they go back and they spend months looking at security policies saying, how do I become compliant? And then we end up hand-holding. And we don't get to that. We don't get to the financial side. That's all covered. The ISOs deal with that. The cores, the contracting officers deal with that. We deal strictly with interviewing, technical controls, inherited controls, that kind of stuff, if that makes sense. Yeah, most of the controls are really met by, does an SOP exist? Has it been updated at least once a year or with every major change? Do you know where it is? Can you produce it? Can you show some type of evidence that you even know how to reference it? It's checking the box. It's not, because they're worried more about the technical stuff because that's just where they tend to go. And I got like 1 or 2 more slides here for you. Here's the good part. Here's the cost savings. So if you want to set this up in-house, money and the CFO always comes down to meeting the bottom line. give you an example of what I pay on average. I've kind of averaged out all their rates, but I pay anywhere from $135 to $170 an hour on average to have someone come in and do some form of testing. When you look at the number of systems I have, if I do just the systems that are the ones we're now doing for the government, not the one that I'm not allowed to do, I spend on average $1.1 million, and I get about 5,200 hours worth of work out of those auditors. Primarily, those are for a 1/3 SCA. So like I told you before, I pay almost full price regardless, tack 10 to 15% on this, and we're going to be in the 1.3 million range to have them come in once a year. And that's that 5 days the kitchen was clean. I can replace this, and this is kind of like a fully wrapped rate for an employee with all their benefits and everything, and I can hire people internally, and I've got juniors, intermediates, and seniors working for me. I can do the same 11 systems, and I can do it for about $300,000 a year, and now based on a 2,000-hour work year, I can get 6,000 hours out of 300K versus 5,200 hours out of 1.1 to 1.3 million. And they can do 1/3 or full SCAs because you have them all year, so they're there every day. It doesn't matter what you decide to do. With your employees, obviously, but your employees bring all sorts of benefits that a contractor doesn't. They're available to you all year long versus that ad hoc engagement. They understand they're more affordable, it's more flexible, they can be groomed to your environment, they have an intimate knowledge of your environment. So all year they're sucking up information on how you work, how the government works, so when a question's asked and when a document's submitted, they can actually look at a security plan and say, is this the same thing as what I saw in my SIA? Or did they write these two separate and they don't seem to line up? That's a huge benefit over an outside third-party auditor because they don't know. They just come in and say, give me what you want me to review. So, and the biggest one, obviously, is the overall cost savings. I think this is the last one. So this is what I was a PM at one point, so a project manager. Lessons learned, I think, are one of the most overlooked or poorly utilized sections or aspects of our job. Everyone should be holding a lessons learned. Everyone should be documenting it. That's fairly common knowledge. You're going to get suggestions and recommendations from everybody that was part of the process so that obviously you can improve it over time. But the problem that I've always seen is no one puts the plan together to actually correct the deficiencies. So what is the point of taking them and writing them down and filing them on a computer or in a file cabinet and no one fixes it, and the next time you have it, you do another lessons learned and you go, boy, these sound familiar. And worse, what if you actually did put a plan in there, but you didn't go test that revised plan to make sure they were beneficial? You know, I do it all the time. My employees get mad at me. I'll go and say, I want to see X, and I'll make them create it, and then when they come back, I'll go, ooh, let's start over. And then they'll say, well, you're never happy. No, it sounded good in my head, but it didn't look good once you put it on paper. So we have to do trial and error until we get what works. And the same thing's going to go with our lessons learned. You're going to try different things, and they're going to fail. And that's okay. You know, the government has a fail fast, fail often policy for us. So we fail, we quickly adapt, and we fix it, and we tweak it until it works. And of course, once everything's tweaked and everything's worked and it's validated, we're going to record those changes in our SOPs and make sure that everything gets updated, hold tabletop tests, make sure everyone knows how to do it, and that they're actually applicable when a situation comes up. But I can honestly say that I don't know of anywhere that the bottom, the red portion, actually gets done. Our environment we do because it's federally mandated. We've got to 4 times a year set up different scenarios and go through them and make sure our SOPs work. I think that's it. Yeah.
So I heard today that DHS has mandated all their agencies to start using DoD STIGs and SOGs.
So we do already. So when you look at our controls, there's a list, and I don't remember all of them off the top, but there's about 6 different platforms, and it'll say like CMS, if they've developed, that's the one you have to use first. I think CIS is number 2, STIG might be 3rd, but it goes down. So it's saying if number 1's not available, go to number 2, and you're supposed to use them in that order. So STIG is the one that we use for most things. Yeah, the problem with STIG is used as a verb. I'm going to stig a box, and everyone says when you stig a box, you break it. Well, the whole point is what can I go in there and fix, what can I go remediate, and what do I have to leave alone? But most people, especially DOD, you'll walk in there and throw your gold disc on there, stigs the box, and it's a brick, and then you start over. So we don't do that.
We do it automatically with things that replace filters.
Automatically? Automatically. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate
Yes,
it.
sir.
Give me a big hand. He'll be around later on for questions.